NAACP Board of Directors voted this weekend to ratify a resolution calling for a freeze on the expansion of charter schools. The board cited the school's lack of transparency and accountability and harsh disciplinary practices as some of the reasons for the decision. Charter school supporters in Cincinnati, Ohio, came from all over the country. In Memphis, protested outside the hotel where the NAACP was meeting because also the NAACP refused to meet with many of those parents. They say the public school system is failing students and charter schools are the only viable alternative. NAACP believes federal dollars used to fund charter schools could be better spent on making traditional public schools better. In a statement, the NAACP said this: while we have reservations about charter schools, we recognize that many children attend traditional public schools that are inadequately and inequitably equipped to prepare them for the innovative and competitive environment they will face as adults. Underfunded and under-supported, these traditional public schools have much work to do to transform curriculum, prepare teachers, and give students the resources they need. And now, of course, there are about 7,000 charter schools in the U.S., servicing about 6% of public schools, some 3 million students, a lot of them minorities. National Alliance for Public Schools called the NAACP move misguided. In fact, we did reach out to the NAACP to get President and CEO Cornell Brooks on the show to discuss this. He did not return our phone calls, text messages, or emails. We also tried to reach Hillary Shelton, of course, who is the VP as well, and then was unable to get him. Joining us via FaceTime from Harlem, New York, Dr. Steve Perry, of course, who runs a charter school there as well as one in Connecticut. So, Steve, NAACP makes this decision. I was looking at a lot of the tweets over the weekend, somebody who, of course, big-time school choice supporter like you, and parents were angry that NAACP wouldn't even meet with them.
I'm not surprised, unfortunately, that the NAACP would not even consider meeting with the parents, because they're stalwart in their position, regardless of the fact that it's based upon specious information and cherry-picked data. Sadly, the national chapter of the NAACP is so significantly detached from what's happening at the local level. Our school in Connecticut has been opened in large part because the president of the NAACP in Connecticut was a staunch supporter of school choice, understanding that it's not just about charters, but it's about school choice. When the overwhelming majority of black children are forced into failed schools, why on earth would you support a system that has never served black people? Established in 1635, a time in which African Americans were enslaved, why would you expect that that same system with this current DNA would produce anything other than that which it has produced, which is a undereducated African American population that's clawing its way up through the social and economic ranks? It's absurd. And let's be honest, we all know that the NAACP national headquarters has received a significant amount of money from the teachers union. The only other organization to call for a moratorium on charter schools in particular, because they are non-union, are the teachers unions. So this is a teachers union statement that they have implanted in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People national headquarters.
Steve, the fact that, first of all, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago that's going to air on TV1, and this time slot on Friday. It's a two-part conversation. Discussion is school choice the black choice, so that'll be on Friday. Plus, we'll air part 2 on next Friday, October 28th. I mean, this is a issue for a lot of black parents. We did a poll here last year. TV1, more than 70% of black parents said that they would put their kids in charters. More than 70% said they even support vouchers. It seems as if black parents are far ahead of where the NAACP is, and the NAACP seems to be opposing what black parents say they want.
Well, because they're supporting the suburban, largely white teachers union. I mean, it really is that simple. It's not about data. They talk about wanting more transparency. I ran a school in a traditional public school system for 10 years, and I now run 2 charter schools. And I can tell you that there's greater transparency as a charter operator because, one, we have a 5-year contract. We have to go through an application process that has to be approved in Connecticut by both houses of the state legislature. And then we could be closed at any time. That's not the case when I ran a traditional school. The traditional school received significantly more money. So when they have this conversation about resources, we receive $15,000 per pupil in a $42.5 million building, as opposed to the $11,000 that we receive and no building. And the list goes on and on. They talk about how they want to make sure that the discipline practices are equal. The fact is that the 90% of all African-American children do attend a traditional public school. So when you're talking about 40% of the expulsions being African-Americans, that's in the traditional schools. That's not among the just 700,000 that are going to charter schools. And finally, when we look at the fact that this is not about data, we have to ask the simple question, then why on earth would they make a decision that runs in the face of the very community that they're supposed to serve? It's because, unfortunately, the national headquarters of the NAACP has lost its rudder, and it is drifting in a direction that runs counter to the very reason why we even have magnet schools and charter schools. It's because in 1954, the NAACP understood that when you assign children to school by zip code, it is proxy to race, and as a result of which, you can keep black and poor kids in failing schools through perpetuity. So they're not even holding on to the very mission that they've become known for.
Steve Perry, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
I want to go to our panel here. What's interesting about this is that President Obama, a huge supporter of charter schools, and again, I was following this. They wouldn't meet with a lot of those parents. They traveled from Memphis. They traveled from all over Ohio. Well, these black parents were saying, no, these traditional schools are failing our kids. If this is my best shot of my kid getting an education, I'm down with it.
Look, I think that in concept, charter schools are fine. I think the state-by-state differences in how they're administered has been my primary concern. That and the fact that I do think teachers' unions are important in general. I've taught at a charter school when I was in graduate school. It was in North Carolina. It was perfectly fine. It was run by some local academics. And then you have instances where charter schools are not run so well. So I think any local parent who's like, look, this is working for me, they have a right to make that argument. I think it'd probably be better for the NAACP to be a bit more nuanced about the argument and say, look, we may not dislike charter schools as a whole, but we got to look at state-by-state examples.
Well, here's the deal, though. Even when we say state-by-state, the reality is that's the exact same thing you can say about traditional schools. You can say, and this is the thing that I've said as somebody who supports school choice. Are there traditional schools that work? Yes. And I say study them, replicate them.
Right.
And then the ones that don't, shut them down, change them.
Right.
There are charter schools that work. I say study them, replicate them. Those that don't, shut them down. I don't back failure. So the problem I have is if the NAACP is essentially saying, oh, moratorium on these charter schools, how about moratorium on these failing traditional schools?
Yeah,
I mean, that to me is a problem here.
Yeah, so there is a big distinction. There's a distinction between for-profit charter schools and non-profit charter schools. Like, let's just acknowledge
about
that they're different,
about 70% of all charter schools are nonprofit.
Right. So
about 70%.
Right. So we got to distinguish it. Another thing we just got to acknowledge: this is a fight in terms of progressive circles, right? And this is one of the big, steps in that fight in terms of progressive circles with regard to charters.
But see, my issue, for me, this is not about progressive circles, Dolores. This is about whether or not black kids are going to get a shot.
Right.
And what's interesting to me is that when I hear this argument, even from the NAACP, I go, we have magnet schools, which actually are selective. I went to one. You had to apply to get in. So when I hear people say, oh, no, that's bad, I'm going, but you support this. Go ahead.
The party line, the Republican Party line has always been for choice, school choice and vouchers. My thing is, why should our children have to stay in a failing school? And why should we have to be in a failing school just because of our zip codes? This isn't fair. And I think parents have the right to make a choice. The parents have the right to make the decision what school the children should go to, not the zip code and not the school system.
Well, let me say this here. First of all, yes, across the country, Republicans have been there. But I know for a fact that in Illinois, when they had a voucher program there, it was also Republicans. It was then State Senator James Meeks, Republicans in the House, 5 of them who voted not for that to go into effect and didn't pass. And so there are places where Republicans have talked a good game, didn't back it up, same as Democrats. See, for me, this ain't a Republican-Democrat thing. This has nothing to do with party. For me, this has to do with whether or not you have options. And the reality, and then when people say, well, look, me and the president went at it on Air Force One 2009. He said, Roland, I would support vouchers if all kids could get one. I said, well, you support charters, all kids can't go. The reality is, in an education system, there will be those who go to public school, traditional, charters, private, homeschool, online school, take your pick. It's all a part of the education pie. On this one, NAACP is dead wrong, and I don't think they're going to be able to win this argument because black parents are going to say, no, my kid deserves an education, and I don't care what y'all got to say. I'm gonna support somewhere where they get a shot.
Well, I think if the NAACP was as equally passionate about accountability in existing public schools, it would be less of a problematic position. Because because I agree with you. Look, if you are in a public school and it's doing lousy, you should be able to pull your kids out. You should be able to fire. The same government employee expectations that we have of local cops should be held of teachers as well. And it should be tested in some way other than just standardized testing. It's like, look, if you've got generation after generation of kids who aren't doing well, fire the principal, fire the teachers, and redo the school. That, to me, is a step one. I think charter schools come after that, but the NAACP's position, again, focus on fixing what exists before you start eliminating the solutions that people want to bring.
And last point, Spencer, the other thing is this. I hear black people talk about having black history in our schools and controlling curriculum. When you run a charter school, you determine the curriculum. You determine that. You determine who gets contracts. There are African Americans who are actually running schools. So this is a way for black folks to say we are in control of our kids' education versus hoping folks listen to us in traditional school.
Yeah, that's true, but we don't necessarily need to impugn the motives of the NAACP in terms of the leadership. They could come to this conclusion. They may be right, they may be wrong, but my point is we don't necessarily have to say they did it for money or impugn the motives.
Well, first of all, anybody, look, if that's your position, that's your position.
Right.
All I'm saying is this here. When it comes to our kids, bottom line is I want our kids to get educated, period. I don't care how. If it works, it works. And if it's a charter school, great. Traditional, great. As long as our kids get educated.
Yeah.